This week, we're going to be looking at exchange theories. Exchange theories deal with the exchange of resources between actors and examine how the structure of social networks influences the flow of resources, the amount of power within networks, and the strength of social ties within those networks. These theories are interesting because they emphasize the exchange relation rather than the individual as the main unit of social analysis. According to this body of research, individuals are situated within relations in which they are mutually dependent on one another. A needs B and B needs A. This means that understanding the relationship between A and B is more important than understanding A and B as individuals. In this video, I want to look at some of the basic concepts that most exchange theories use and explore how one exchange theory was developed to explain power. Exchange theories are concerned with relationships rather than individuals, so these theories focus on actors, not just people. An actor is any social agent. An actor can be a person, but it can also be a group, like a corporation or a military unit, or it could even be an entire nation. This means that exchange theories have the ability to span the breadth of sociology. They can be used to describe micro situations, as they're often used to do so in social psychology, but they can also be applied to macro situations, things like negotiations between multinational corporations or between countries. A social exchange is any situation where a resource is passed from one actor to another. Exchanges can be dependent, in which case the flow of resource depends on the behavior of individual actors, or the exchange can be interdependent. That means that the flow of resources depends on the combined behavior of two or more actors. Whether an exchange is dependent or interdependent is what characterizes the structure of an exchange relation. A transaction is a mutually beneficial social exchange. All actors in the exchange benefit somewhat from the exchange. Although benefits don't need to be equal, some transactions will benefit one party more than another. Exchange relations are a series of transactions that exist between at least two actors. If you repeatedly buy groceries from the same grocery store, then you're in an exchange relation with that store. Resources are any social object that an actor in the exchange relation values. Resources can be tangible, things like money or property, but they don't need to be. Intangible things like praise, companionship, or moral support are also resources. Whether or not something counts as a resource depends on the specific exchange relation. In order for something to be a resource, someone in the exchange relation has to want it. When an object is valued by one actor in an exchange relation, then that object becomes a resource for the other actor. Suppose you had two friends in an exchange relation. Friend A needs a ride to the airport while friend B has a car and free time. Friend B has a resource because they have something that friend A wants. But if friend A stopped needing a ride to the airport, then friend B would no longer have a resource for that exchange relation, even though they still have a car and free time. That's because the objects are only considered resources when they're valued by an actor in the exchange relation. Exchange relations can be limited to a single kind of resource, or these relations can be quite broad. In the grocery store example, there are two resources being exchanged, money and groceries, so the exchange relation is fairly limited. But relations often include a broad range of resources. A group of friends, for example, might exchange a lot of different resources between themselves. Emotional support, solidarity, manual labor, for instance when a friend helps another friend move, logistical support, like lending a car, and advice are all resources that are commonly exchanged between friends. So the exchange relations of friend groups often include a very broad range of resources. Actors are almost never involved in a single exchange relation. So we can think about actors as existing within exchange networks. These networks include everyone who is connected together through exchange relations. For example, we can have a network where A is in an exchange relation with B, B is in an exchange relation with C, and C is in an exchange relation with B and D. We can map out all of these connections to get the full exchange network. All exchange theories share an assumption that actors in exchange relations are rational. This assumption means that actors behave in ways that increase their access to the resources that they value. In other words, if an actor wants something, then we assume that they will do things that help them get that resource, and that they'll avoid doing things that'll make it harder for them to get that resource. Another way of putting this is that actors try to maximize rewards and minimize punishment. A lot of people have been critical of rational actor assumptions as they exist in exchange theory and in economic theories. But a lot of times that criticism comes from a misunderstanding of the assumption. Notice that this assumption says nothing about the type of resources that motivate actors. We do not assume, for example, that all actors will try to increase their wealth. Only actors that value wealth as a resource would treat it as a resource, and so we should only expect actors that value wealth to try to increase their wealth. Other people may value other resources. For example, a philanthropist might value effective social programs, and so they might act in ways that increase the number of effective social programs. This is still a rational actor, even though they're not behaving in a way that increases their wealth. The rational actor assumption also does not require perfect decision making, nor does it require perfect information on the part of the actors. Actors can make bad decisions. That is, they can do things that will lower their access to a valued resource, even though they believe their decision will increase their access to that resource. As long as they're trying to increase a valued resource, then they're still a rational actor. All that the rational actor assumption says is that actors will try to increase their access to valued resources. This assumption is what motivates behavior in exchange networks. So these concepts, along with the rational actor assumption, sit at the heart of every exchange theory. To show what exchange theories can be used for, let's look at an early theory within this area, Emerson's power and dependence theory. In our week on legitimacy theory, we discussed the concept of power. If you recall from that video, we made a distinction between power and authority, but we did leave the idea of power a little bit vague. Power can be thought of in a lot of different ways, but Emerson's theory treats power as a property of an exchange relation. Actors involved in an exchange relation can either be high, equal, or in low power positions relative to the other actor in the relation. What does it mean to say that someone is in a low power position? When we think about power, we tend to think of it in terms of powerful people. Maybe someone is powerful because they're stronger than someone else. Or maybe we see someone in a powerful role and assume that they got there because they were able to outcompete or bully their way to the top. This view of power assumes that power is a property of individuals. But this view of power is not without its problems. For one, when we treat power as a characteristic of an individual, it's never really clear what we're talking about. Being a powerful person might mean being the strongest person, but in some cases, it means being the smartest person. Often, what it means to be powerful in one situation is meaningless in another. So this view of power makes it very difficult to compare situations. Another problem is that so much of what we think about as power is tied up in the roles that people play, not the people themselves. The President of the United States is powerful, but people who are elected to that office don't come into it with the powers of the President. You don't get the keys to the nukes until you get elected, and you don't get to take them with you when you leave office. Instead of thinking of power as something an individual possesses, it's useful to think about power as a property of relationships. Emerson argued that power in most social contexts was just that, a property of relationships and not people. When we think of power, we're really thinking of the ability of one actor to overcome the resistance of another. This view of power goes all the way back to Weber. The total power of A over B is equal to the amount of resistance by B that A can overcome. Recall that Emerson's ideas about exchange emphasize the mutual dependence between individuals. According to Emerson, we can think about power as a property of these relationships. The more dependent you are, the less power you have. The less dependent you are, the more power you have in the relationship. Dependency is how much A needs B to gain some resource, and the extent to which A can use people besides B to gain access to that resource. At the heart of Emerson's ideas about power and dependence is the concept of resources. Recall that resources are anything that an actor values, and that can be obtained through an exchange relationship. The fact that actors are situated within relationships and that they need others to gain access to resources is what connects power to dependency. If someone has something you want and they're your only option for getting it, then you're highly dependent on them for that resource. To help you, they can demand a lot in return. In other words, they have power over you. In effect, they can charge a higher price, even though most of the interactions you have in your day-to-day life rarely seem that transactional. At the same time, if many people can offer you what you want, then the power of any single person over you will be low. That's because you're less dependent on any specific person. You can always go someplace else. So power and dependency are two sides of the same coin. Emerson expressed this idea by stating that the power of A over B is equal to the dependency of B over A. Being the low power member of a relationship is rarely a comfortable experience. When someone in a high power position uses their power to get what they want, they do so at the cost of creating tension between them and their partner. People don't like having power used against them, so when it happens, they're likely to take steps to change the nature of their relationship, so that the relationship becomes more equal overall. This process is known as power balancing, and there's 4 major ways people can balance power. The simplest approach is to find another relationship that can provide you with the resource you want. This approach involves looking for other people who can help you achieve your resources. In effect, you're extending your network. If your network is large enough, then this strategy can be a viable way to get what you want. The more trading options you have, the more you can leverage alternatives against potential trading partners. You can always go someplace else. There's a somewhat amusing example of this process in action in dating websites. There's a trend on dating apps for straight men to send out low-effort messages. It's no secret that a lot of guys on dating sites will send out low-effort messages. Why do they do that? Well, they do that because the ratio of straight men to straight women on dating sites skews very heavily towards men. There are more men than women. So for any straight man on a dating site, they have fewer potential romantic partners than any straight women on the same site. That means that they're more dependent on any potential exchange relation. Thoughtful messages take time to write. So a guy who sends out that perfect message to each person he's interested in is going to have a much smaller network of potential partners compared to a guy who sends out the generic hey message to everyone he matches up with. In the long run, the low-effort messenger is less dependent on any one partner compared to the high-effort messenger. Of course, members of the Lonely Hearts Club are not the only ones who try to increase their power by extending their networks. This principle applies to all sorts of power relationships, from negotiations between multinational corporations to a price-savvy consumer shopping for the best deal. All of these situations involve one actor decreasing their dependence on another by expanding their network of partners. But what if you can't extend your network? Well, there's other ways to balance power in a relationship. Another power balancing technique is to increase your partner's dependency on your relationship by providing extra resources. They have to be resources that your partner actually values. On dating sites, unsolicited, explicit photos aren't as valuable a resource as some people seem to believe. In interpersonal relationships, the additional satisfaction of goals often takes the form of a special kind of praise. Offering praise is a strategy that rewards the high-power actor by acknowledging their unique position of power within the relationship. This giving of praise, what we call prestige, is valuable to others, and it's valuable because it feels good. That's really it. It might not seem so insightful, but a lot of human behavior is motivated by rewards in this way. People like being praised. And so if you're able to provide praise to them in a meaningful way, they're more likely to value your relationship. The point here is that by creating an extra resource for your partner and then satisfying that resource, you've increased the value of your relationship for the other actor. You're giving them something they can't get elsewhere, and so they become more dependent on you and thus less powerful. Of course, this approach only works when the prestige is actually valued. In the dating world, one response that some men have to the experience of power imbalances is to heap so much insincere praise on a potential partner that they come off as desperate. The nice guy of dating lore really is just a power balancing strategy gone awry. Of course, the nice guy approach is likely to fail. because the insincere praise being offered is not a resource. Remember that resources are things that others in the exchange relation value. And it turns out that most people don't really value cynical or insincere praise. Another way you can balance power is through coalition formation. Imagine an actor dependent on another actor. Let's say a worker who's dependent on their employer for a wage. In a lot of occupations that rely on low-skill manual labor, workers have very little power relative to their employers. You want to be paid more? Fine, go work somewhere else. There's lots of people ready to take your place. Situations like that were the impetus for labor unions. When individually low-power workers got together and refused to work unless they received better benefits or wages, they could collectively withhold their labor, bringing business to a halt. This brought more balance to the relationship. The final power balancing strategy is when low-power actors decide to devalue whatever resource the high-power actor is providing. Obviously, in our dating site example, the resource is dates or companionship, so a low-power actor could just decide that dating really isn't that great, which doesn't really happen that often. It's far more likely for the low-power actor on a dating site to lower their expectations of a successful match. They might decide, for example, that they really don't care that much if they get matched or not, or to not get heavily invested in any one match. Alternatively, they might adopt attitudes that favor meeting in person rather than on dating websites. One interesting thing to note about Emerson's ideas on power and dependency is that a small number of concepts have been used to explain a fairly wide range of phenomena. The behavior of straight men on dating sites, the giving of praise or prestige, the formation of unions, how multinational corporations are likely to interact with each other, all of these phenomena can be explained with the concepts from exchange theory and by power and dependence theory. Notice that this theory says nothing about the innate characteristics of any group of people. It explains things like the behavior of men on dating apps in terms of the relative positions of power and dependency within those networks. If the situation on dating apps were reversed, that is, if there were more straight women on those sites than straight men, then we would expect an increase in low-effort behavior from women on those sites. So I want to end by pointing out that Emerson's theory of power and dependence relations is not normative. In other words, the theory is concerned with making predictions about what will happen in an exchange network, not what should happen. This theory can tell you who in a relationship is likely to have power, and in some cases, it can tell you who in an entire network will be the most powerful. What it cannot tell you is whether or not that's a good thing, whether you think unions are good or bad, or that some group has too little or too much power in society. Those are normative questions, and they fall outside the scope of this theory. Okay, that's all for now. I'll see you in the next video.